The cold hit me before I could even open my eyes. It wasn't the jolt of a nightmare. It was a sharp, physical pain, a blade of ice that stole the air straight out of my lungs. I shot up in bed, coughing, my chest burning from the shock, my silk pajamas and the sheets soaked through with freezing water. It was my 4th wedding anniversary. The clock on the nightstand read exactly 5 a.m. I wiped the water from my eyes. At the foot of the bed stood my husband, Robert, looking down at me. An empty glass pitcher hung from his hand, and on his face was a crooked, disgusting smile of pure superiority. "My sister, my mother, and the kids will be here in half an hour," he said, in that commanding voice he used whenever he wanted to play the man of the house. "And you still haven't cooked or cleaned the living room. Get up, you idiot." The silence in that room was absolute, broken only by the sound of water dripping off the mattress onto the floor. Any other woman would have screamed. Any other woman would have cried from the humiliation. But I don't cry. I've spent 10 years working as a cybersecurity engineer. My brain doesn't process panic. It processes threats, and it runs elimination protocols. I stared at him, stone-faced. He mistook my coldness for defeat. He threw a rough towel at my face. "Dry off and get downstairs. My mother wants fresh coffee, and get out the good china. I don't want my family thinking we live like beggars." He turned and walked into the bathroom. 10 seconds later, I heard the hot water running, and his voice whistling cheerfully in the shower. He felt invincible, king of his little castle. I pulled the towel off my face, and just sat there for a moment, soaked, freezing, staring at the closed bathroom door. I thought about the woman I used to be before this man. 10 years ago, I graduated top of my class in computer engineering. I built firewalls for banks. I got recruited by 3 different companies before I turned 26. I used to walk into a room and people listened. And somewhere in the last 4 years, I had let all of that shrink down into someone who got water thrown on her face at 5 in the morning and was expected to say thank you. I met Robert at a friend's barbecue, back when I still believed charm meant something. He made me laugh within 5 minutes. He asked about my job like he was genuinely fascinated, leaned in close, remembered small details I mentioned only once. It took me almost 2 years to understand that this wasn't interest. It was reconnaissance. He was cataloging what I had, quietly deciding how much of it he could eventually claim as his own. The first year of our marriage, he called me brilliant in front of his friends. By the 3rd year, he was correcting my grammar at dinner parties to make himself look smarter by comparison. The transformation was so slow, I never felt it happening, the way you don't notice a room getting colder until your fingers are already numb. Not anymore. I did not get out of that soaked bed to make breakfast for his insufferable mother. I got up to destroy his life. 5:05 a.m., 25 minutes left. I left a trail of water down the hallway and locked myself in my home office. This was my sanctuary, the one room Robert hated because the 3 security monitors on my desk reminded him he was never actually in control here. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I should explain something. This morning wasn't the beginning of my plan. It was the execution of one. 2 months earlier, a bracelet went missing from my jewelry box. Then a pair of earrings. Robert blamed the cleaning lady, fired her without asking me, and moved on like nothing happened. But something about the way he refused to let me look at the security footage from the front gate that week made my skin crawl. So, quietly, using skills I'd spent a decade mastering, I installed hidden cameras through the house myself. Not just at the door. Inside. In the bedroom. In the kitchen. In his home office, the one he never let me enter either. I told myself it was about the jewelry. Some small part of me, the part that still remembered how to protect herself, knew it was about something bigger. What I found over those 2 months wasn't another woman. Not yet anyway, though I hadn't ruled it out. What I found was worse in its own quiet way. Days of footage of a man rehearsing his own importance in an empty room. Practicing the tone he used when he wanted to sound like a provider. Counting my money in a spreadsheet labeled our finances that only he had access to. Calling his mother every single day to complain about me while I was at work earning the salary that paid for the phone in his hand. There was one clip from 3 weeks earlier that I hadn't told Marcus about yet, that I still hadn't fully let myself sit with. It was Robert on a call with his mother, pacing our living room at midnight while he thought I was asleep upstairs. "She still thinks it's 50-50, Mom," he'd said, laughing quietly into the phone. "Once the house is in both our names, I'm done playing nice. She'll never see it coming." Too busy staring at computer screens to notice anything happening right in front of her. I had watched that clip 4 times at 4 in the morning, feeling something in my chest go very still and very calm, the way the ocean goes quiet right before it pulls back from the shore. He thought I was blind. He never once considered that the woman who built firewalls for a living might notice when someone was trying to break into her own house. I typed in my password and logged into the encrypted server. There it was, the 5 a.m. clip in crystal clear 4K. I downloaded the footage of Robert dumping ice water on me and calling me an idiot while he laughed. 4 gigabytes of pure, documented domestic abuse, uploaded straight to my lawyer's secure cloud, joining weeks of quieter evidence I'd already been collecting in silence. With my legal shield already raised, I opened my banking app. It was time to check the numbers before the slaughter began. Robert, a mid-level office clerk earning barely $2,000 a month, strutted through our house in the hills like he was some kind of tycoon. To protect his fragile ego as the provider, I had been quietly transferring $900 from my own paycheck into our joint account every single month, letting him believe his contribution was what kept our life running. But looking at last night's transactions, my blood boiled. 5:10 a.m. 19 minutes left. Charge, $1,600. The Cliffside Grill. Timestamp. Yesterday, 10:30 p.m. Last night, the eve of our anniversary, he had texted me saying he had to work overtime while I sat at home with dinner going cold, waiting for him, checking my phone every 10 minutes like a fool. A lie. He had quietly drained my emergency fund, money I had built up over years for exactly this kind of rainy day, to pay for a massive seafood dinner for his mother, his sister Laura, and her kids, at a restaurant he knew I'd never set foot in because I was supposedly too tired from work to enjoy nice things with him. I looked at my own reflection in the dark monitor screen, hair still dripping ice water. Robert wanted to play landlord with my money. Fine. It was time to show him what a real landlord looked like. I closed the banking tab and opened the account freeze application. 5:15 a.m. 14 minutes left. My fingers hovered over the phone screen. The joint account showed a balance of $31,400. Of that, $30,600 had come exclusively from my own paychecks and transfers over the last 3 years, a fact my lawyer had meticulously documented weeks earlier, complete with bank statements and timestamps, because he knew this day was coming long before I let myself admit it. The remaining $800 were Robert's contributions. I wasn't going to leave him 10 for a cup of coffee. 3 taps on the screen, and I executed an immediate transfer. I emptied exactly $31,400 into my private, high-security account, leaving our shared account at a humiliating, resounding 0. Next, I opened the credit card tab. Robert had a gold card under his name, paid for by me, of course, with which he loved buying rounds of drinks at the bar while pretending to his friends that he was some kind of executive. His mother, Carol, had her own supplementary card for emergencies, which magically kept getting used at expensive hair salons and designer handbag stores, emergencies that never seemed to involve hospitals. Freeze card. Robert Reyes. Reason: lost or stolen. Freeze card. Carol Reyes. Reason: lost or stolen. The ATM had just swallowed their entire rich people fantasy whole. I smiled, imagining the look on my mother-in-law's face when her morning cravings hit a locked door. I stood up from my desk chair. The ice water in my pajamas was starting to dry against my skin, but the cold in my chest had already been replaced by pure surgical adrenaline. I walked into the hallway. From the master bathroom, Robert's voice echoed over the running water, belting out some song at full volume. He felt like the absolute ruler of the universe, oblivious that the empire underneath his feet had just been quietly demolished. I stepped into the bedroom and threw open his closet doors. I didn't bother folding anything. I pulled 3 heavy-duty black garbage bags from under the kitchen sink and started emptying his shelves. His cheap office suits, the ones I paid to have dry cleaned every week. His imitation designer watches, the ones he showed off to his friends and swore were real. His shoes scattered across the floor, 3 different pairs of sneakers he'd bought for networking events that were really just afternoons at the bar. All of it into the trash. Then I went to the TV stand, unplugged his precious game console, the one he played for 6 hours a day while telling me he was too exhausted from work to help around the house, and let it drop carelessly into the third bag along with his shelf of expensive face creams he refused to let me touch. I lined the 3 black bags up in front of the main door. They looked like 3 bloated corpses waiting for the coroner, which, in a way, was exactly what his marriage had become. 5:22 a.m., 8 minutes left. I walked to the hidden panel behind the bookshelf in the living room and opened my personal safe. I pulled out a pristine manila folder. Inside was the deed to our house. When we bought this place in the hills, 2 years before we even got married, I had covered 100% of the down payment with a bonus I'd earned from a cybersecurity contract most people would need a decade to understand. Robert had been too busy bragging to his friends about buying a mansion to ever actually read what he signed in front of the notary. He signed where I pointed. He always did. He thought paperwork was beneath him. We had married under a separate property agreement, and I was listed as the sole, exclusive owner of the property. In his arrogance, Robert had simply assumed that putting a ring on my finger meant 50% of everything I owned magically became his by divine right, that marriage was some kind of hostile takeover he'd won just by showing up. He was about to get a very painful lesson in property law, delivered personally before sunrise. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I knew, as well as my own birthday. "Tell me he did it." My lawyer and best friend Marcus answered on the second ring, his voice already sharp, already awake, like he'd been waiting by the phone. He had known about the situation for months and had only ever been waiting for my signal. "He threw ice water on me at 5 a.m., I said, my own voice pure ice. "I have it in 4K. And he drained our emergency fund to buy his mother a seafood feast the night before our anniversary." "My God," Marcus sighed, and I heard papers shuffling on his end, folders he'd clearly kept ready. We moved to the final phase. The account's empty. His things are in trash bags. His family arrives in 5 minutes. The legal notice goes out to his office at 8 a.m. sharp. He has no claim to that house. "Eleanor, throw him out into the street." I hung up. I looked at myself in the hallway mirror. My silk pajamas were still damp, my hair a mess. I was not going to greet my executioners looking like a victim. I ran upstairs to the guest bathroom and changed in record time. I put on a black cashmere turtleneck, a pair of impeccably tailored slacks and heels. I pulled my wet hair into a tight, severe bun and painted my lips a dark, defiant red. I looked in the mirror one last time and barely recognized the calm on my own face. I was no longer a maid about to serve breakfast. I was the owner of this house, about to carry out an eviction. 5:28 a.m. 2 minutes left. I stood in the front hallway next to the garbage bags. The shower finally shut off. I heard Robert whistling as he opened the bathroom door, no doubt wrapped in nothing but a towel, expecting to smell fresh coffee and toast waiting for him. "Elena," he bellowed from upstairs, in that alpha male voice he'd never once used to thank me for anything. "That table better be set." And then the front doorbell rang. It wasn't a polite knock. It was 3 sharp, authoritative bangs, followed by the unmistakable, shrill voice of my mother-in-law through the door. "Robert, honey, open up. It's freezing out here and the kids are hungry." The trap was set. The show was about to begin. The doorbell rang again, this time joined by my mother-in-law's fists pounding on the solid wood. "Elena, open this door right now. The children are freezing," Carol shrieked. Before I even touched the handle, I heard a beautiful, heavenly sound behind me across the landing. A click. It was the unmistakable creak of Rose's front door, our neighbor, the head of the homeowners association, and the biggest gossip in the entire neighborhood. At 5:30 in the morning, the noise had woken her up. Perfect. The audience had taken their seats. The show could begin. I turned the key and threw the door wide open. The freezing morning air rushed in, but I didn't flinch. "Carol, Wrapped in a faux fur coat I had paid for last Christmas as a gift she never once thanked me for, had her mouth already open, ready to unleash an insult. But the words died in her throat. She had expected to find a submissive daughter-in-law in soaked pajamas, shaking and apologizing for being late. Instead, she found a woman dressed head to toe in black, red lips, eyes like ice. Behind her stood Laura, my sister-in-law, hauling bags and shepherding her 3 young children, who were whimpering from the cold, still half asleep, dragged out of bed for a breakfast that was never going to happen. "What on earth are you wearing at this hour?" my mother-in-law stammered, thrown off balance. "Where's breakfast?" I didn't answer her. I took a step back, grabbed the 3 heavy garbage bags, and with one calculated shove, rolled them across the floor until they slammed against Carol's expensive designer boots. "What is this?" Laura shrieked, jumping backward. "Garbage," I said, in a flat, even voice. Someone had to take it out. At that exact moment, Robert's voice thundered from the end of the hallway, getting closer to the entrance. "Elena," he roared, in full alpha husband mode, completely unaware of the audience gathering at his own front door. "I've been asking for my coffee for 10 minutes. If my mother has to wait outside, I swear." Robert appeared in the doorway. He froze. The scene must have looked completely surreal to him. He was barefoot, wrapped in nothing but a white towel that barely reached his knees, hair dripping, smelling like the imported shower gel I bought him because he refused to use anything under $50 a bottle. He saw his mother staring at him in horror. He saw his sister. He saw the garbage bags. He saw me, dressed like I was heading to a funeral, blocking his path. And most devastating of all for his fragile ego, out of the corner of his eye, he saw Rosa standing in her doorway across the way, drinking in every single detail of the king caught in his underwear. "Mom," Robert stammered, losing every last shred of authority in a single second. His arms crossed instinctively over his bare chest against the freezing air. "Elena, what is this joke? Let them in right now." "No one is coming into my house with dirty shoes, Robert. Especially people who weren't invited." "Elena, are you out of your mind?" he hissed, glancing nervously toward Rosa's door. "You're making a scene in front of the neighbors. Get back inside. We'll talk about this." "I'm your husband." "You are my husband," I corrected him. I pulled out my phone, turned the volume up to maximum, and hit play. The audio was crystal clear in the dead silence of the hallway. "Get up, you idiot." The sound of water splashing and Robert's cruel laughter echoed off the walls, off the same walls he'd been so proud to show off to his family 2 minutes earlier. Carol clapped a hand over her mouth. Laura stared at her brother, eyes wide with shock. Across the way, Rosa let out an audible gasp of outrage. The provider, the golden boy, had just been exposed as a cheap abuser in front of the one person he feared most, his own mother, and in front of the worst possible jury imaginable, the entire neighborhood, who would be repeating this story for years. "You just spent $1,600 of my emergency fund treating your family to a seafood dinner," I said, my voice cutting through the cold morning air, "while telling me you were working overtime. I've already emptied the joint account. I've canceled every credit card, including your mother's supplementary one. And the legal notice my lawyer drafted is waiting for you at your office at 8 o'clock sharp. Your cheap suits, your Xbox, and your humiliation are all in those bags." Robert was cornered. Panic twisted his face. His entire facade had completely collapsed in front of the exact people he had built it for. Seeing no way out, he reached for his most cowardly weapon, emotional blackmail. He grabbed one of Laura's sons by the shoulders, a 6-year-old boy shivering in his pajamas under his coat, and pulled the child in front of him like a shield. "Elena, for the love of God," Robert begged, his voice cracking. "Let them in. It's below freezing out here. It's 5:30 in the morning. Are you really going to leave 3 small children out in this cold? You have no heart." That was the moment. The moment the world expects a woman to break, to swallow her fury for the sake of the children, to become the self-sacrificing mother figure everyone always demands. I felt something twist in my chest looking at those kids.
I want to be honest about that.
It would have been so easy to let it undo me. I looked at the children shivering. Then I looked into the empty, desperate eyes of the man who, 30 minutes earlier, had thrown ice water in my face while laughing, and who is now using someone else's frightened children as a human shield against the consequences of his own choices. I didn't waver. "You invited them into your house, Robert," I said, my voice so cold it froze the air between us. "Too bad this one is mine, and I didn't invite anyone. There's a diner 2 blocks from here that opens at 5. I suggest you hurry before your card gets declined there too." I took a step back toward the warmth of my hallway. "Elena, no, wait," he shouted, lunging toward the door, releasing the boy so fast it was almost funny, proof that even his hostage-taking had been half-hearted. Barefoot, I slammed the solid oak door in his face. It made a hard, final, definitive sound. I immediately turned the key. Click, click. Double bolt. I stood there in the hallway, listening through the wood as Carol's hysterical screaming began, the children's crying, and Robert's pathetic fists pounding against the door, begging me to let him in while he froze half-naked in a bath towel on a doorstep that no longer belonged to him. The execution had been a total success, and the day had barely even begun. I stood in that hallway for a few more minutes, savoring the silence that slowly replaced the shouting on the other side of my door. Eventually, the footsteps faded down the stairs, a small procession of humiliated people trudging toward a car in the freezing dark. Later I'd learned from Rosa, who hadn't missed a single detail from her window, exactly how the first act of his pathetic downfall had played out. 6:15 a.m. The gas station coffee shop. Robert, still wrapped in my white towel because none of his own clothes had made it out of the garbage bags, had to beg his sister to unlock her own car just to escape the cold, standing in the driveway in nothing but a towel and bare feet on frozen pavement. They drove to a gas station diner on the edge of the neighborhood, the only place open at that hour. All 3 children were crying from hunger and cold, still in pajamas, confused about why Grandma's house had turned into this. Carol, echoing hot with fury, demanded a hot breakfast immediately, as though the universe still owed her one. Robert, trying to salvage some scrap of his dignity as the man of the house, marched up to the register to pay a bill of barely $35 for hot chocolate and pastries. He slid his shiny gold credit card across the counter like it still meant something. Declined. The cashier looked him up and down, this grown man standing at a gas station register wrapped in a woman's bath towel. Robert, breaking into a cold sweat in front of his own mother, tried the debit card linked to the joint account. Insufficient funds. Shame paralyzed him on the spot. Carol had to dig out her own grandmother-style coin purse to pay for her grandchildren's toast, staring at her golden boy with a mixture of disgust and deep disappointment, the first crack in a lifetime of blind devotion. Robert didn't have a single cent to his name. He was, quite literally, worth 0, standing in a gas station in a towel at 6 in the morning, discovering that his entire identity had been rented, not owned. 7 a.m. The family group chat. While I made myself a cup of green tea in the comfort of my climate-controlled kitchen, calm settling over me like a blanket, my phone started buzzing on the granite countertop like it was possessed. 47 new notifications. Reyes family group. The messages from my mother-in-law and sister-in-law were a masterpiece of toxic victimhood, arriving faster than I could read them. Carol, you are a monster. A heartless witch. My son is going to take that house and leave you out on the street for what you did to his family. Laura, my children are traumatized. You're a psychopath, Elena. You're going to pay for this. Aunt Diane, someone I had met exactly twice in 4 years of marriage, chimed in too. What kind of woman does this to a man on their anniversary? Shameful. I took the phone in both hands. It was time to drop the nuclear bomb. I didn't write some long, defensive essay justifying myself, explaining the years of small cruelties, the receipts he demanded, the way he made me feel 2 inches tall in my own home. Narcissists and their enablers feed on explanations. They twist every sentence into a weapon. So instead I simply uploaded 2 files. File 1. The 4K video from 5 in the morning of their beloved Robert dumping ice water on me while laughing and calling me an idiot. File 2. A screenshot of the drained bank account, clearly showing that of the $31,400 in that account, every single paycheck deposited over the last 3 years had my name on it. I added a single line of text. To take something from me, Carol, you would first have had to actually contribute something. Here is your provider in his natural habitat. Since you all love him so much, he's yours now. Don't forget to buy him some shoes. I hit send. I waited exactly 30 seconds to make sure the little blue read receipts popped up next to every single name in that chat, including the distant aunts and cousins who cared so much about appearances and had spent 4 years quietly judging my worn cardigans and my cold personality without knowing a single true thing about my life. Then I hit leave group and blocked every number. End of transmission. 8:30 a.m. Professional ruin. Robert had no clothes, no keys to my car, and no money for a cab. He showed up at his logistics office almost an hour late, wearing an old, borrowed tracksuit from his brother-in-law that hung off him 3 sizes too big, sleeves flopping past his hands like a child playing dress-up in his father's clothes. But the outfit wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was that when he reached his desk, in front of his entire department, a courier was already waiting for him. He handed over a thick envelope. It was the legal notice drafted by Marcus, the expedited divorce filing, the immediate eviction notice, and a preliminary restraining order based on the video of the ice water assault, filed the moment my lawyer's office opened. Robert collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands while his co-workers murmured and pretended not to watch. His facade had been completely annihilated. In the one place he thought his reputation was still untouchable. Word travels fast in small offices. By lunch, half the department had heard some version of the story, and by the end of the week, a woman from his own team, someone he'd spent months quietly flirting with at the coffee machine while I paid the mortgage, stopped returning his messages entirely. His manager, a woman herself, apparently pulled him aside a few days later to discuss his conduct going forward, though what exactly got discussed, Marcus never found out. What we did find out, months later during discovery, was that Robert's borrowed tracksuit and his empty wallet weren't even the worst humiliation of that day. He'd left his office badge at the house, in the pocket of a suit now sitting in a donation bin, and had to be walked in and out of the building all week by security like a visitor in his own workplace. The man who once demanded I address him like the head of the household couldn't even open his own office door without a stranger's help. The weeks that followed were quiet on my end and chaotic on his. I heard the updates only through Marcus, delivered like little gifts over coffee. Robert tried calling my office twice. My assistant hung up both times, per my instructions. He tried showing up at the house once. Rosa, delighted to finally have a real role in the drama she'd been narrating to the whole street, called the police before he even made it up the driveway. He tried, briefly and pathetically, to get his mother to talk sense into me, not realizing Carol had spent the last 2 weeks discovering just how many of her own emergency purchases had quietly been funded by my card, and was too embarrassed to ever bring it up again. Then, 3 weeks after the divorce filing went through, Marcus called with something I genuinely hadn't expected. Robert, desperate for cash and increasingly convinced I owed him something for years of his life, had tried to quietly sell off a watch collection he claimed was his grandfather's, an heirloom piece he'd shown off to every one of his coworkers for years as proof of old family money. The pawn shop appraiser recognized the pieces immediately. They weren't his grandfather's. They were mine, inherited from my own grandfather, sitting in a box in the back of our shared closet that Robert had apparently been quietly borrowing from for years without ever asking, the same way he'd been borrowing my paycheck, my down payment, and my patience. The shop called the number on file, which was mine, not his. He hadn't even bothered changing it. Marcus laughed so hard on the phone he had to put me on hold. He tried to pawn your dead grandfather's watches to pay his bar tab, Eleanor. I don't think I've ever had a client this easy to beat in court. I didn't laugh, not right away. I just sat with it for a moment, the quiet, total confirmation that everything I'd built my case on hadn't been paranoia. It had been years of pattern, finally given a name. It made me think back to the small things I'd let slide over the years, the things I told myself weren't worth an argument. The way he always paid the restaurant bill with my card but told the waiter to bring the check to him first, so the table would see him hand it over like a gentleman. The way he introduced me to new coworkers as my wife. She does something with computers, waving his hand vaguely. never once saying the word engineer, because the truth made him feel smaller by comparison. The way he'd cry, actual tears, whenever I brought up splitting chores fairly, and somehow I always ended up comforting him instead of getting an answer. None of those things alone would have convinced a judge, or even a friend, that something was deeply wrong. But stacked together, morning after morning for 4 years, they had quietly worn down a version of myself I almost didn't recognize by the end. Watching the pond watches confirm it in black and white felt less like a shock and more like finally being handed the receipt for a bill I'd been paying without ever seeing the total. 6 months later, the courthouse was unusually quiet that morning. In one last, desperate act of audacity, Robert tried to request spousal support. His lawyer, a cut-rate rookie his mother had scraped together the money to pay after Marcus's reputation scared off 2 other firms, argued that I had left him in a vulnerable position, that 4 years of marriage entitled him to something. The judge read our separate property agreement first, his expression unreadable. Then he watched the ice water video, the whole room forced to sit through Robert's own laughter playing on a courtroom screen. The look the judge gave my ex-husband afterward could have frozen hell itself. "Mr. Reyes," the judge said, not bothering to hide his distaste, "you are asking this court to award you financial support from a woman you assaulted on camera, using money that was never yours to begin with. I've seen a great many requests in this courtroom. This one is remarkable." Robert's lawyer tried one final desperate angle, gesturing toward me and arguing that I had orchestrated the entire confrontation, that a woman who could plan something so precisely must have wanted it to happen, as though foresight was somehow evidence of cruelty rather than simple self-preservation. The judge looked unimpressed. "Counsel, your client poured ice water on a sleeping woman and called her an idiot on camera. Whether or not she saw it coming does not change what he did. If anything, the fact that she had a plan in place tells me she knew exactly what kind of man she was married to." The petition was thrown out in under 15 minutes. Robert shuffled out of that courtroom looking like he'd aged 5 years in 6 months. He had lost weight. The arrogant swagger, the alpha voice, all of it was gone. I later learned from Marcus that he was living on his sister Laura's couch and that she was charging him rent he could barely afford on his mid-level clerk salary, in the same apartment where her kids still flinched a little whenever a glass of water got poured too quickly at the dinner table. He was no longer the golden boy. He was a burden, exactly the thing he had always accused me of being. Carol called me one more time after the ruling, from a number I didn't recognize, probably borrowed from a neighbor, since I'd blocked every phone she owned. I almost didn't answer. Some old habit made me pick up anyway. "Elena," she said, and her voice had none of its old fire left in it, just exhaustion. "He's not eating right. He won't get a real job. He says the salary is beneath him. I don't know how to help him anymore." I let the silence sit there for a moment before I answered. "You spent 4 years telling me I wasn't good enough for your son," I said, quietly, without any anger left in me at all. "Now you finally get to find out exactly what he's worth without me standing behind him. I hope the answer teaches you something." I hung up before she could respond, and this time, I didn't feel the need to block the number. There was nothing left for her to say that could reach me anymore. I woke up at 8 on an ordinary Sunday, months after all of it was finally, legally, permanently over. Sunlight poured through my bedroom windows. The sheets were warm and dry, and had been every single night since that morning. I walked down to my kitchen, which smelled like peace and silence instead of demands and receipts. I switched on my new Italian espresso machine, a $10,000 indulgence I bought myself with money nobody else gets to ask me to account for, and made myself a perfect latte. I leaned against the counter, looking out at my garden, the one Robert used to call a waste of our money. Sometimes society tells women we're supposed to be the cushion that absorbs the blows of mediocre men. That we're supposed to endure abuse for the sake of the family, for the sake of appearances, for the sake of children who aren't even ours. But I learned something that morning, standing in my own quiet kitchen with my own money in my own name, that no one can ever take from me again. Peace of mind is priceless. And the best revenge was never going to be screaming on a staircase. It was leaving them exactly where they built their own downfall. Out in the cold, in a borrowed towel, discovering all at once that everything they thought they owned had never really been theirs at all. Underestimating a quiet woman who knows exactly what she's worth is the most expensive mistake a man can ever make. Robert thought a wedding ring made him the owner of everything I had built with my own 2 hands. He never once imagined that the silence he mistook for weakness was the silence of someone reading his every move, documenting his every lie, and waiting patiently for months for the perfect morning to lock the door on his entire world. I think about that morning sometimes, not with hatred anymore, but almost with a strange kind of gratitude. It taught me something I don't think I ever would have learned any other way, which is that the people who insist the loudest that they're in charge are usually the ones who've never once had to survive on their own. Robert needed an audience to feel powerful. He needed my money to feel like a provider. He needed his mother's approval to feel like a man. Strip all 3 away in a single freezing morning, and there was nothing left standing behind the towel at all. I don't know what happened to the version of me who used to set the table before dawn and count grocery receipts like they were confessions. I think I left her behind on that mattress, soaked and furious, the exact moment I decided to walk into my office instead of into the kitchen. Some people need thunder and shouting to change their lives. I only needed 25 minutes, a keyboard, and the sudden, absolute clarity of knowing I would never again apologize for being the one who was actually paying for the roof over both our heads. He got exactly what he built for himself. Piece by piece, lie by lie. He just never expected to find himself standing outside of it, in a towel, in the freezing cold, with nothing left to his name but the truth everyone finally saw for themselves.